Happy Saturday, my dear test subjects. Today is September the 17th. As in these weeks we go through the release in theaters of the Woman King movie, a completely fan fiction made up about a supposed queen of the kingdom of Dahomey, we actually have in history the 640th anniversary back in 1382 of a real woman being elected real king of a country. I'm talking about Mary, Queen, but also King of Hungary and Poland. She didn't reign long enough, to be fair. Men didn't really like it to have a king title given to a woman, but nevertheless, at the very least, she existed. What we have with us for today is some more communication from Blizzard about their intents with their classes and their specs in Dragonflight. This is always good, right? You have to be okay with the good news and the bad news, the good times and the bad times, because at the very least you are getting some communication out of it. You can sort of see the point of view from the developers that are in charge of shaping your class and shaping your spec for the next expansion. Of course, the biggest news of the week so far have been the comments about both Rogue and Priest. The one about Rogues, it seems enjoyable, it seems even fun in the first place, until then you realize that some people actually did not like this type of mechanic in the first place. What I am talking about is Blizzard going over to Subtlety Rogues and trying to turn them into Windwalker monks. Because this is what Windwalker monks have as a passive. Essentially their whole thing is about hitting different abilities every time to continue to keep up this damage increase. In the new talent tree, Blizzard is informing us that your feedback, my dear rogues, here and elsewhere has not fallen on deaf ears. In hindsight, stopping by the forums sooner to say as much probably would have helped, and I hope you are willing to accept a peace offering. The peace offering to Subtlety Rogue, which is the least changed of the rogue specs and more importantly, the only one of the 3 rogue specs that does not have either a party buff or a raid buff, so they are in pretty dire straits right now. The offering for Rogue is Dance Macabre. Shadow Dance increases the damage of your attacks that generate or spend combo points by 10%. This 10% gets increased by an extra 10% for each different attack used. Bonus resets when an attack is repeated. So if within Shadow Dance you get to use 3 to 4 different abilities, you can start doing 40 to 50% more damage. 10% more base damage plus 10% for every different ability you are using. This is of course very reminiscent of what monks already have. The entire mastery and the entire playstyle of monks. It is of course quite interesting because, inside of Shadow Dance is supposed to be your power window, which is where you are just using your hardest hitting abilities. So Shadow Strike or Eviscerate. Any type of finisher with Shadow Strike, if it's AoE, it's gonna be a different one, but generally speaking it's just those 2 abilities you are using. Instead, this talent is sort of encouraging you to use multiple different abilities to stack up this type of buff. Of course, while this one might seem like an interesting buff, in the end it will be subject to the rule of simulations. Either simulations will tell us that this passive is going to be strong enough to use, or the simulation will tell us that losing out on spamming Shadow Strike is just too much damage lost. Therefore, this talent will never be taken or never be used. So it's a possibly interesting talent that we will have to see based on the tuning, based on the damage it will do, whether or not it will be even playable or popular in the first place. At the very least, the dev that communicated this to Rogues is also pointing out that a handful of more changes and significantly more functional talents will be hitting the PTR and beta across the next couple of builds. So changes for Rogues are imminent in Dragonflight's beta. What, on the other hand, is much more bleak and depressing was the dev diary about Priest. Now, we have covered Priest actually a lot in the last few days because they have received a lot of number changes and tuning to their talents already existing. We have covered, in particular, Shadow Priest and Holy Priest quite a lot in terms of changes. But this comment from the Blizzard's devs in charge of Priest is more from a design philosophy. Many Priest players are already quite depressed, quite disappointed in reading what it's written in here because it's mostly just not many good news are being written in here about priests. The message starts with complaining from the devs about the number of active spells that Priest has. They point out that They think that priests have too many active spells. They think that having things like Shadow Mend and Flesh Heal doing mostly the same thing is just confusing and unneeded. So they are thinking about getting rid of Shadow Mend, and then they further continue saying they are also discussing Mind Games and even Power Word Life as spells to be potentially removed. Now, some people might get confused by this point because if you look at here, the maximum number of abilities a priest can use is far below the ones of a Resto Shaman or the ones of a Resto Druid. In the case of Discipline Priest, is actually one of the lowest in terms of buttons available. I think the point from the devs is less that they have too many buttons, but more than they have too many buttons that do too many similar things. If you look at Holy Priest, while still having a dozen or so less abilities than a Resto Shaman, they still have Heal, and then Flesh Heal, and then Shadow Mend, and then Holy Word Serenity, and then Power Word Shield, and then Power Word Life. That is 6 different abilities that do single target healing. Sometimes it's instant, sometimes it's in a shield, sometimes it's a big heal with a longer cast, or a short heal with a shorter cast, but you have 6 different ones. Shaman, who has way more buttons than Priest, only has 3. Riptide, Healing Wave, and Healing Surge. The point is likely that while other classes have way more buttons like a Druid and a Shaman, they have things for specific situations, for specific scenarios. Shamans have Slow Totem, Stun Totem, Root Totem, Speed Totem, they have a Mana Totem, they have a Poison Cleansing Totem, they have a Physical Damage Reduction Totem, they have an Absorb Totem, a Rest Totem. So even though the buttons are many, all of these buttons do very significantly distinct and different things, whereas for Priest it's just too many similar things. I believe that's what they were going for with this message to the Priest community. On the 3 specs, they point out that while they are still monitoring the whole change with Discipline, working now with Renew and with the reworked Power Word Shield, they don't currently have plans to change Discipline and how it works with this reworked version. While Discipline has historically worked around Penance, they still want to make other spells feel relevant too, like Power Word Shield, as they have been doing, and even empowering Smite more. For Holy Priest, they point out that they want Lightweaver as their alternative design to Flesh Concentration, because they feel like weaving between Flesh Heal and Heal is fun, if you don't make it to be just a maintenance buff, which is what currently Flesh Concentration is for Holy Priest. It's just a remember to cast Flesh Heal once in a while to keep up the buff and then continue casting Heal. They want something a little bit more dynamic than that. Shadow Priest is of course a little bit of a different and tougher discussion because it has been changed once again multiple times over. Just recently, a few days ago, we have looked over the very vast rework that happened to many of the abilities of Shadow Priest. They are happy for the moment with giving different cooldowns to Shadow Priest, both Dark Ascension and Void Eruption existing in the same talent tree, and they are still wary of the existence of Mind Spike and Mind Flay trying to coexist in the same rotation. Now, if up to now most of these comments are mostly agreeable with, there isn't nothing too out of the ordinary with these comments about the specs in particular. Where things start getting a little bit sadder is when they are asked about specific issues with Priest and the answers they give. Shining Force. As you remember, if you watch my videos, we mentioned that Shining Force, the knockback crowd control that Priest used to have in their talent tree, had been removed. It's no longer available. Instead, it was replaced with a root. So their point is that the spell was deliberately removed in Dragonflight. Why? Because apparently the amount of crowd control available across all classes in Dragonflight is causing concern. On top of this, the prevalence of knockbacks is already increasing in Dragonflight PvP, and knockbacks can be most influential control effect on arena or battleground maps. This would make sense if it wasn't for the fact that Priest already had Shining Force to begin with. It's not something they were thinking about adding in Dragonflight and then they turned back because they realized there were too much CC being added. Shining Force had existed for several years, available to the Priest, so perhaps you might have thought about removing some other sources of crowd controls from other classes, rather than taking it away for Priest, for example. Another request for Priest players was Spectral Guise. Spectral Guise was essentially a mini Vanish, a pseudo Feign Death to give a little bit more resistance and defensiveness. It also allowed you to cheese some targeted mechanics, to Spectral Guise out of it when the hit was coming, for example. It gave Priest a little bit more tankiness. That is also being denied by pointing out that we have discussed the ability and decided against it, and our stance has not changed. We do not want Priests entering stealth, especially in PvP, as it removes Priests from the target, and then also Hunters, Rogues and Mages already do this often enough. So, the same explanation for Shining Force. We are not giving you back Shining Force because there are other classes and specs that have been given too many crowd control abilities, and we are not giving you Spectral Guise, some more defensiveness, because there are other specs and classes that are doing this already. Okay, fine. What about the interrupt? Shamans used to be the only class with an interrupt as a healer. Then we enter Dragonflight and you have the Evokers with an interrupt, you have Monks given an interrupt, Paladins given an interrupt, you have Druids given an interrupt, and at this point the only healer who is left without an interrupt is Priest. Blizzard once again goes the "we understand your concerns" route, but their answer is we are not adding silence to the Priest general talent tree. Having access to an interrupt is not something we view as necessary for all specializations. In PvP, Holy and Discipline already provide valuable control to their team, and additionally having silence would provide more control than we are comfortable with. This is especially true with how much control is becoming available across all classes in Dragonflight. So this response is once again the same. We have given already so much stuff to other classes that we really can't give silence as well to Priests. This is also even more confusing when you consider that the statement "we do not believe that giving an interrupt to everyone is something necessary." It isn't until you went into Dragonflight and literally gave it to everyone except Priest. Every single class and every single spec at this moment has access to an interrupt. The only two specs without this feature in Dragonflight will be Holy and Discipline Priest. So we are talking about 2 out of 38 specs without an interrupt. You know, Priest players would have been much less annoyed if they also saw that Evokers didn't get an interrupt, that Holy Paladin didn't get an interrupt, that Mistweaver Monk and Resto Druids did not get an interrupt, but at this moment it's literally just them without an interrupt. The requests from the player base and the denials from Blizzard continue. Another request from the player base was personal defenses. While Shadow Priest has access to Dispersion, which is a good defensive, Holy and Discipline, once again, don't have that. And they don't have anything in return. They have their external defensive, Guardian Spirit for Holy, and Pain Suppression for Discipline, but nothing else, especially when those are expected to be used on tanks, for example, or players who can often take a lot of damage, certainly not themselves, unless you are in PvP. And their answer is, once again, for similar reasons as silence, we will not be adding Dispersion to the Priest class tree, so to make it available to Holy and Discipline as well. Healing Priests are understandably on the weaker side of the defensive spectrum, but our answer to that isn't to bring Dispersion to the class tree. Between Desperate Prayer, Power Word Shield, Angelic Bulwark, Translucent Image and Spell Warding, we feel Priests are in an okay spot. We have also increased the damage reduction effect from Translucent Image to 10% and separated Phantasm from it. This was possibly the dev trying to be funny, because Power Word Shield shields still for quite little, Desperate Prayer is just a heal, Angelic Bulwark is an uncontrollable 15% max HP shield, which is shit even compared to Nature's Guardian, which is a much better version of this effect given to a Shaman who is already more tanky than a Priest, and on top of that, the Shaman's version has a 45-second cooldown while the Priest version has a 90-second cooldown. Also, this effect for Priest is a capstone last talent of the general tree, which means if you want to go there, you have to forego one of your other two picks, like for example Mind Games or like for example Power Word Life. Translucent Image is what you already had before, which is now given back as a talent, which is a 10% damage reduction on your fade, and Spell Warding is 3% less magical damage taken from your talent tree. All of this definitely does not make them tanky, and all of this definitely does not make them hard to kill. And then we finish with the complete clown world of Mind Bomb. Mind Bomb was the option, one of your talent option to turn your fear, your AoE fear, into an AoE stun. And then it was changed and turned into a disorient rather than a stun. So on the question of, can we please get back the stun, Blizzard? The answer is, once again, no. We pulled back on the AoE stun availability some time ago and decided against adding this one back so that we wouldn't find ourselves in the same situation we were in the past. If everyone has an AoE stun, then it's not going to feel special to have one in the first place. So, the entirety of this communication snippet from Blizzard to the Priest community is that they can't give Priest anything because some other class, somewhere, has that already. You can't have a silence because we don't need every class and spec to have a silence, yet Priest is the only one without one. We can't give you a knockback like Shining Force because there are already multiple other classes that have been given a knockback. We of course can't give you an annoying stealth mechanic like Spectral Guise because you already have Mage, Hunter and Rogue playing around with that, so we can't give you that. We can't give you more personal defensives because we feel you already have enough. And of course Mind Bomb, why would you want Mind Bomb to be turned into an AoE stun? There are already too many classes and specs with AoE stuns available. So overall, this entire message to the Priest community has been quite badly received, as you know, as expected, since there is literally nothing positive across all of this. So the complaints are warranted. We are going to see later down the line if Blizzard is going to walk back on some of these words and eventually end up giving Priest some of these features, like giving Shining Force back or caving and finally giving Priest their interrupts as well. I would think that even if Blizzard settled for a 50-50 and giving them just half of these things, that would be satisfying enough in the end. Certainly more satisfying than the current situation in terms of the utility and the things that Priest have available. Of course, some people have wondered if many of these things not given to Priest might be because they are being held hostage, they are being held captive by the power of Power Infusion, for example, or other few very specific things that only they have, like for example Fortitude, the only spec with a raid buff for stamina, and Master Spell, the only spec, the only class with a Master Spell. So perhaps the rarity of these buffs, the only one in the game to have stamina, the only one in the game to have Master Spell, and the only one in the game to have Power Infusion, might make the spec weigh so much in terms of what can Blizzard give them in terms of utility that they feel like they have no design space for all of these other requested things. The interrupt, the knockback, the AoE stun, more defensives. It might be that Blizzard doesn't feel comfortable giving them all of this stuff while they already have powerful things in their toolkit. So these have been the two bits of news for classes and specs for today. The somewhat positive, okay-ish one for Rogue, and then the mostly negative, mostly doom and gloom one about Priest. I would leave all of my Priest viewers with the question: would you rather have many of these situational powers back? So knockbacks, interrupts, AoE stuns, more defensiveness at the cost of losing things like Power Infusion, for example. Would that be a fair trade-off for you while playing Priest? That could be an interesting question for the Priest player base. Besides this, I'm going to leave you to the rest of your Saturday and your weekend. Of course, as usual, a round of applause and thank you very much to all of my patrons for supporting me and helping me to continue to contribute to the WoW community with this content, even though as we keep going I am still somehow without beta access to Dragonflight. I guess I must have fucked some Blizzard's employee's daughter when I was on vacation in the US last year, probably. I'm not sure. You can, of course, to support this channel and myself, like and comment down below on this very video, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Together with, for some more social interactions, you can follow me on Twitter, as well as subscribing to my Patreon, which can be both found at these two links right down there. Thank you guys, of course, for watching the video. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, I would, by the way, if I were a Priest main, I would ditch my stamina and I would ditch my Power Infusion to get all of these things that are supposedly getting denied from Priest in exchange.